equipping you to navigate your grief journey after child loss. This is the Hope After Child Loss podcast. On each episode, we explore the many challenges of grief as guests share their stories of loss. It's also a place where you will hear about God showing up in our darkest moments and restoring meaning, purpose, and hope to shattered lives. Welcome to another episode of the Hope After Child Loss podcast. Thanks for joining us today. I'm Greg Bufkin, and on this episode, I'll be talking with Martha McGeehon, co-founder and director of Just Enduring, a nonprofit providing resources to grieving parents, family, and friends, as well as caregivers. We'll be talking about her grief journey, which began in August of 2018 after losing their sweet 4-month-old baby daughter, Everly, as well as the nonprofit I mentioned earlier. Now, here's my conversation with Martha. Well, Martha, welcome to our podcast. It is so good to have you today.
Well, thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate you giving me the opportunity to share our story.
Well, every story is important. Every story matters. So I'm thankful that you had the courage to come and share your story. I think it'll touch a lot of people's lives.
Well, thank you. I'm hopeful.
Yeah, absolutely. Martha, why don't you take a couple of minutes, like I usually do with all of my guests, and give them a chance just to get to know you a little bit by sharing with them whatever you would like.
Sure, happy to. Thank you. So again, Martha, I'm a mom of 3, live in the Midwest, and my oldest daughter is 9, and then our middle child, Everly, died when she was 4 months old in 2018, and then we had a son in 2019 who is now 5 and very, very much a 5-year-old. So we're still very busy with a 9-year-old and a 5-year-old in the house, and enjoying life and trying to navigate what it means to be a parent after loss.
Yeah, and that's not a very easy thing to do, is it?
No, not always.
No.
I think one of the things that I heard early on that still really sticks with me is it never gets easier. You just get stronger. And so it sometimes feels like it's a little easier to hold, but it's still the same weight. It's all still there. It's just you grow and you get stronger in navigating life after loss.
Yeah, I understand that. That absolutely makes sense. For you, Martha, and or your husband. So you guys have a 9-year-old and a 5-year-old, and I know that requires a lot of time and attention on your parts. How has losing Everly affected your parenting with your 2 living children? Because it affects everything. It touches every aspect of our lives.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think it's also one of those things that it changes with time. So our oldest had just turned 3 when Everly died. Everly died about 10 days after her 3rd birthday. And so initially, parenting was a little bit of a lifeline. It was, what we had to get out of bed. We had to keep putting one foot in front of the other because we had another daughter that needed us and we had to take care of her. And we also had to navigate what grief looks like when you're 3. And knowing that just like adults and just like all of us, grief is very different. And, one 3-year-old is not the same as another 3-year-old. And so we also had to kind of navigate, is this her being 3? And because she's our oldest, we'd never had a 3-year-old before, or is this grief? So we spent a lot of those early days just navigating how to best support her. In making sure also that her life wasn't always made up of her sister being gone. So really trying to focus on making things special for her. So, our first Christmas was also, her 4th Christmas. And there's, those early milestones with holidays, right? They're also new and different. A 4-year-old's Christmas is different than a 3-year-old's Christmas is different than a 5-year-old's Christmas. And so we wanted to be very mindful of how do we make sure this is still special for her and creating memories for her while also trying to balance that we're navigating our first Christmas without Everly. Um, and, as she's grown up, she still talks about her sister. She still shares memories about her sister. And that's been really important to us to make sure she's got a space to feel like it's not a taboo topic in our house, that she has a sister and she should be willing to tell everyone that she has a sister. And we'll talk about how she misses her sister and how, the things that she wishes she could do with her sister whenever she wants. And we also, if, she's been known to walk up to strangers, a common conversation with strangers and little kids is, do you have any siblings? And she'll tell people, yeah, I have a little sister and she's dead. And that's not always easy for people. So we've had, but I also want her to feel confident in sharing that. And because that is her reality. So we spend a lot of time with her, just helping her feel confident and comfortable in her own grief and in her own memories.
Right.
And, but then it's very different for our son, who was born about 18 months after Everly's birthday. So there, if he was still with us, they'd be about 18 months apart. So he's really just within the last year, really grasping and understanding what we mean when we talk about Everly, and what we, that, he has another sister that he never got to meet. And I think for him, it will always be far more abstract than it is for our oldest.
Yeah, I'm sure.
Yeah. But I think we also want him to feel like he can ask questions and that it's not a taboo topic. So navigating grief with littles is certainly something that we have not shied away from, but also know that it's, as they hit different developmental milestones, their grief hits different developmental milestones too. And they have to, and together we have to navigate what that means as they, learn more and understand more about how the world works. They ask different questions and want to know more information. So, I think for us, it's really been important to just be as open and transparent about everything that we can be with our kids. It also gives us a sense of not taking the little things for granted. And trying our hardest. There are definitely still days when, we're not perfect parents, and we get frustrated with our kids, and then they do something that we don't love, and we react as humans. We also try and step back and recognize the bigger picture, that, like these moments may be the only moments we get. It's not an easy journey, but one that we try and take on as best we can.
Yeah, those are good words. And circling back, so you guys aren't perfect parents?
No, we are not.
Well, join that large club of the rest of us. No, but those I love some of the things that you were describing there. I think it is important that at their stage of development and where they are, depending upon their age, what they're able to absorb and understand. And that's not always easy for parents, especially when you yourself are on a grief journey that, for you guys, you had to start having those conversations pretty early on. And sometimes that can just bring back up. It can kind of pull Band-Aids off of those wounds when you're having to explain that to somebody else, even your own children.
Yeah, 100%. For a really long time, our oldest, for probably a month to 6 weeks after Everly passed, we, if we walked into a room, she would look at us, and one of the first things she would say is, "Everly is dead." And it was this I think she was checking in to make sure that reality was still true, but and it it was not easy by any means for us to hear that on such a regular basis from such a small person, but we had to, again, think about the bigger picture. For her, this was really her first interaction with death. And while we were struck beyond belief that she grasped it in such a concrete way that she did, but she was still, it was this like regular, like, I know you told me, and I know that that means that she's never coming back, but I just want to make sure that that's what that means.
Right.
And yeah, that was hard, and that was raw. And like, I think exactly like you said, it would, rip the Band-Aid off of whatever little pieces that we had cobbled together. A lot of times. So yeah, it's certainly a complicating and complex factor to grief when you're trying to help another small person navigate it as well.
Sure. I mean, it's a difficult subject for a difficult concept for kids to try to wrap their heads around. And at some point, I mean, they're not ready until they get to some point, and you just don't know because every child is different.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Martha, when we think about that, the grief journeys that we've both been on, it affects everybody differently. We know that it affects men and women differently. But I think there's enough, we know enough now to know that grief is more than just those emotions that people see and hear. There's a physical aspect of it. There's a mental aspect. There's a spiritual aspect. I mean, it's much bigger than people who have never experienced it can even begin to imagine. For you, what do you remember as being having the biggest impact on you? Was it the physical component, the mental? What would you say?
Gosh, that's a hard one to pin down. What was the hardest? I think I remember being most surprised by the physical reaction that my body just ached, and being really surprised by that part of grief that I didn't have any expectation that would be a piece of it. And then I think the other piece that surprised me the most was really as I came out of those early weeks and months, and I'm sure you've heard, the term grief brain, and I was expecting to not really be mentally on my game. I had a really hard time for a long time recalling easy words, things like that was not expected. And again, I think I know we don't talk enough about grief, just in general as a society, but the little bits that, I had certainly had experiences with other types of grief in my life and other people in my life who'd experienced different types of grief. And those two reactions in my body were really unexpected and something that I had never heard of until I went through it myself.
Yeah, it's a common response.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
It's just, as you said, it's just one that other people don't hear very much about. And that goes back to what you also said. We don't talk that much about it in our culture, both inside and outside the church. It's just, I don't know why, but it tends to be a subject that makes everyone a bit uncomfortable, and to have those kind of conversations makes them feel a little awkward. But we don't come with an instruction book, on how to grieve.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so when we experience the impact that it has, sometimes it leaves people feeling like they're going crazy.
Yeah, absolutely. Those days when I couldn't come up with simple words, I was very confused about what was happening and why it was happening.
Yeah. I can remember those days quite well too. And, it does take you by surprise because you like to think, I mean, some of us even more than others, kind of like being in control. And when we're not, it just doesn't fit very well. And I think that's it sort of reminds me of another aspect of the grief journey. And that's when it happens. I think most of us kind of go along every day. Just, we know what our typical everyday life is like, within boundaries. We know that there are going to be surprises along the way, but we don't expect surprises like this. We don't expect to ever lose a child. And I mean, because it's just totally out of the norm. It's backwards. We expect that our children will bury us. And I think it causes us to really do a lot of introspection, realizing that, the control that we thought that we had really was nothing more than an illusion. We have very little control. For you, I don't know how that impacted you, Martha. I know how it impacted me, and I've talked to others and heard their stories. What did that look like for you?
I think if I were to think about it in, the last 6 years, I think I've come to a place now where it's freeing to not feel like I have to hold on so tightly and have so much control over everything. And it impacts the way we make decisions as a family. Just a small example that I know will be very different than how other families approached it. But, during the pandemic, we made a choice to send our kids back to preschool pretty early. They were out for about 11 weeks, and we decided as a family to send them back when daycare opened again and when they were available to go back to preschool. So it was in like June of 2020. And we spent a lot of time as a family talking about, is this the safe choice? Is this the right choice? And ultimately my husband and I came to the conclusion of, there's only so many things we can control. And in this situation, what we can control is our kids' mental health and their social health. And for the two of them, it's more important that they have that social outlet and that they're not stuck in the house with us 24/7. And again, I fully recognize that there are a lot of other people that made different choices that are different than ours, but it came down to, we've been in a situation where we felt like we did everything right. We asked all of the right questions. We did all of the right things, and bad things still happened. And so now when we approach those hard choices like that, it's really from a place of, how do we make the most informed decision, knowing that at the end of the day, we can't control every outcome. And how do we do what's best for us as a family when we don't have that control? That, again, to your point, that control is just an illusion. So we use the information we have to make the best choice that we can, and we hope for the best. But sometimes we just have to take the leap and trust that we're making the best decision with the most information we have at the time.
Yeah, there's definitely wisdom in that. And I think it also speaks to something else. You sort of alluded to it. When we experience that level of trauma, I don't know about for you, Martha, but I know we experienced, it's sort of, how should I put this? We sort of lost some of the things that we feared before, because when you experience the worst that you can possibly imagine, then so many other things just pale in comparison. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. Those fears are smaller than
right. Yeah. That makes sense. You kind of alluded to this a few minutes ago too. I think one of the things that parents who are particularly in that early season of grief, somewhere along the line, it starts to dawn on them that we're going to have to do Christmas and Thanksgiving and their birthday and vacation without our child. How are we going to do that? I mean, it just seems like one of those thoughts that you just want to push out of your mind as quickly as it comes in, but it's something that you got to walk through. We don't try on this podcast to offer counsel to people because I'm not a professional counselor. What we can offer is just what we experienced and what worked for us. So for you guys, like you alluded to a few minutes ago, when your daughter was, 4 when you lost Everly? And so for y'all, it was your first Christmas without Everly, but it was her 4th Christmas. So how did you guys do that, Martha? Because I know that had to be so incredibly difficult.
Yeah. And I think we've approached each one every year a little differently and whatever feels right in the moment. And I think that's the biggest piece of advice that I would share is to just really think about what feels right now and do that. And don't feel like it has to be the right thing forever. And you can make a different decision the next holiday that comes around. But so what we have, how we've approached holidays is again, with that mindset of like, what feels right now. And those first early holidays, what felt right was taking care of the people that helped us get through those early days of.
Yeah.
So she died in August. So we were a few months past that moment, but not a huge window of time. But so we, on Thanksgiving, we took breakfast to the first responders that were with her in her last moments. And that's, again, what felt right on that day for us. And then on Christmas, what we decided to do, because we couldn't imagine not hanging a stocking, but then also the feeling of her stocking being empty was really hard to think about. So what we asked our friends and family to do was just to do something in Everly's memory over the course of the holiday season. Send us a letter, address it to Everly, and we put it in her stocking. And then on Christmas, we read all of those letters together. And it, in so many ways, not only did it give us just a sense of peace that her legacy lived on and that other people were thinking about her in that holiday, but it also really gave us a very clear, separate time that, we could still do all the Christmas morning traditions and things that made Christmas for our other kids, but we also had this separate time that was really special and dedicated just to Everly too. And we've done some variation of those things every year. Sometimes it's the same, sometimes it's just slightly different. But that's really how we've decided to approach it, is how can we honor her in this season, but also make sure that it doesn't take away from the day that our other kids also need to have.
Yeah. And that's not always an easy balance, is it?
No, it definitely is not.
No. But those are such thoughtful things that you guys did. I love the way you handled that. I mean, you kept your family traditions for your living children, but you also made a way to honor Everly. And I just think that's so important. And I think it sends a message to your other children that she's still part of your family, always will be. Yeah. One of the things that comes up quite often in a conversation with, if you know other people who have experienced the kind of loss that we have, somewhere along the line, conversation related to how others have responded to our grief generally kind of seeps into the conversation. And you hear an incredibly wide variety of stories, some funny, some maddening, and some that just absolutely defy logic. What was that like for you guys? I mean, and I'm not talking about just the things that were challenging responses from other people, but the good things as well, because most of us tend to get both, and hopefully it sort of weighs out in favor of the good things that we remember.
Yeah. I think in my case, it certainly has. I am quite certain that I have heard our fair share of platitudes that don't make sense and well-meaning comments that are really hurtful. And I think in a lot of ways, I have not retained those, probably for the better. But certainly, heard things like, she's in a better place, or, all of
Right.
the platitudes that, again, not helpful. But, and I also try and, again, at this point now that I am in my grief journey where I am, recognize that in so many ways that goes back to we don't help people help grieving people. We've never, we don't tell people how to support people who are going through something like this. So they're doing the best that they can with the best that they have. And again, I think 99.9% of the time they mean well, and they're using the vocabulary that they have. And again, it's a lot easier for me to recognize that now than it was young.
Yeah.
But, I think to the good things and the things that really were the most meaningful, it was a lot of the people who just showed up. They didn't try and fix it. They didn't necessarily do anything profound, but they just came and sat with us, or brought us our favorite coffee, or, we had a lot of friends who in those early weeks would just text us and say, "Hey, I'm at the grocery store. I'm going to pick up some stuff, some snacks for your kids," or, they just told us they were doing it. And I think in a lot of ways, those were the things that were the most helpful, because it also, as I'm sure you remember, thinking about anything is incredibly taxing.
Indeed.
Whether it's, what groceries do I need to, how am I going to get my lawn mowed? All of those things, it's just, you can't process them in those moments. And so the people that just took care of that stuff. And I think we as a society are so scared to do the wrong thing that we just don't do anything at all.
That is so very profound.
Yeah. And I think my experience was, it was so much more helpful if someone just, again, it was very hard to do the wrong thing.
Yeah.
Again, to my earlier point, I don't really remember anyone doing the wrong thing. So either they did it and I just didn't retain it, or it didn't happen, because what people did do was helpful, and just showing up is helpful. So I think I share that message a lot when people ask me, what can I do for someone else who's lost a child or had a miscarriage? It's show up, just bring them coffee, bring them an Uber Eats gift card, just do something. Don't stay silent, because that's harder on them and you.
Yeah, that the silence hurts, because most of the people that we know, after a few days or a few weeks, even if we haven't been in close contact, most know what happened, and to not hear from them, it's I don't know. I don't even know how to say. I don't even know how to say very well how hurtful that can actually be. I would rather somebody take the risk of saying something, and even if it's a little bit off base, rather than doing nothing. I don't know. That just the silence just hurts.
It does, and I think that I can say that the silence is what has stuck with me, not the people who said the wrong thing.
Yeah.
I can tell you who the people in my life are that didn't show up and didn't say anything, but I couldn't tell you the people who said the wrong thing.
Yeah, I love that. That you what you remember is that they showed up, and people don't realize how profound that actually is. I mean, so many people try to think of, significant things that they can do, but sometimes the most significant things that they can do are the simplest things.
Absolutely.
Yeah, please, don't feel like you've got to come up with all these magic words that are going to make us feel better, because chances are we won't even remember what you said to begin with. We're not projects that need to be fixed. Yeah, we're people that are hurting, and we need to be loved, and we need to be supported. It's that simple. And there's a lot of right ways to do it. But again, people don't come with an instruction booklet for how to help grieving people.
Right.
So we're learning, and they're learning. So we do have to give lots of grace to each other, and be very patient, don't we?
Yes.
Yeah. Martha, I do want us to talk about something that I learned in a previous conversation, and it can be an awkward, difficult subject to talk about, particularly in Christian circles. But I think it's important, because I think what you guys experienced represents what a lot of other people have experienced, but maybe have not had a platform to talk about it from. And maybe they're afraid to talk about it. just totally uncomfortable talking about it. But what you shared with me is that you guys were both brought up in the church. You guys are both believers, and your dads were pastors. And some of the deepest hurt that you experienced after losing Everly was from people in your church. And I know this may be difficult for you to talk about, but if you can, I would love for us just to touch on that because, again, I think your story represents more people than we realize.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, and I think I've shared this a couple times. When you first reached out to me, my response was, I don't think I'm who you want on your podcast.
I remember.
And it took me, and you sent back a very gracious note that said, that encouraged me in the moment. And then it took me a while to get back to that note because I do think it's hard to have these conversations. No one is having them. And that's part of the reason why I did reach back out, was because I really felt like there is a message here. So yeah, my husband and I, we both grew up in the church. We, going to church on Sunday morning was not optional. We were there every Sunday, no matter what we were doing on Saturday night. And we continued that tradition early on in our marriage and early on with our kids. And then the unthinkable happened and Everly died. And both of us felt very alone and very confused. I think the version of Christianity that we had been brought up in was very much the prosperity gospel of you are a good person, so good things will happen to you. And we were never given the tools and the theological understanding to grasp how something like this could happen to us.
Sort of a formulaic approach to a relationship with God.
Right. Absolutely. We had gone, we'd done all the things. We checked all the boxes. We went to summer camp. We went on mission trips. We were good people. We took our kids to
right.
church. And when we started asking those questions and really trying to dig into what does this mean and how do we reconcile our understanding of the institution of religion with what we just experienced, what we got met with was a lot of, we'll just keep going to church, you'll feel better. Just read this devotional, you'll feel better. But no one was really willing to dig in and have the messy, dirty conversations with us about how can I show up on Sunday morning and sing worship songs if I don't understand how God could, quote unquote, let something like this happen. And I think it's taken me, again, almost 7 years at this point to really come to terms with, I don't think that's, God didn't let this happen. It happened. And I still haven't found a lot of people who are willing to have those messy conversations. I think there are I found bits and pieces of some good resources out there. Probably the most helpful and most profound for me was When Bad Things Happen to Good People. It's written by a rabbi who also lost a son. And he talks about it from a theological perspective too, about who is this God that we believe in when all of these bad things happen in the world. And messages like that have been what have helped bring me around to being able to have these conversations. But I think the unfortunate thing is still there aren't enough people in our churches and in our Christian circles who are willing to have those conversations in person. And I think that's what's made it really hard for us.
I agree.
In the church again.
Would you repeat that?
Yeah, I think because people aren't willing to have those hard conversations. I think that's what's made it really hard for us to find a place in the church again.
Yeah. And that's so unfortunate. And because we're supposed to be God's people. The church is supposed to be God's people. And so we represent him. We represent Jesus. And that's not how God would receive us. We can have those difficult conversations with him. I mean, the Bible is full of examples of people crying out to God, angry and feeling like he's betrayed them. And they feel embittered. They feel like God has just totally turned their backs on him. And they expressed all of that. And God didn't disown them because of that. God reached out to them and he allowed them to express that. He's the one that gave us the emotions that we have after all, and he's a good father. Any good human father is not going to disown his child if they get angry with him. I know my children got angry with me about different things, when they were growing up. I'm sure they could tell you many stories. But did it change my love for them? No, of course not. But I wanted them to know that we could talk about it. And I think that's what God wants. And I don't know why people who represent him have such a hard time being willing to talk about those difficult things, because they're real. And if you haven't experienced it, just hang on, because you will at some point, and you're going to need to have that conversation. It just really breaks my heart that you guys experience that, because that's not God's heart.
Yeah. And I think it in a lot of ways goes back to the platitudes that we were talking about earlier. It's the same thing. It's just a different version of, well, just pray about it. Just read the Bible. Just do this devotional. You'll feel better. I'm like, well, but I really want to wrestle with these hard questions and have dialogue about it. And we've had a very hard time finding anywhere that's willing to have that dialogue. And I think that that's really unfortunate.
I do too.
Relationships are messy, whether it's a relationship with God or a relationship with a person, it's messy. And being willing to have those messy conversations is what helps people grow. And having them in silos and in solitude is hard. And that's really part of where we are, is we're having those conversations and doing that work alone. And so we haven't found that community.
Well, I pray that you will, because it makes all the difference. God didn't mean us to do life alone. He meant us to do life in community. And, when things stay in the darkness, they don't typically get better. Mm-hmm. It's only until we let the light shine into the darkness that they do start getting better. And I love and appreciate your courage to be willing to talk about something that is just not easy to do. So thank you for that, because I think a lot of other people who are listening today and in the future to our conversation, I think they're going to be able to connect at a very deep heart level with that.
Well, thank you for the opportunity and for the nudge to keep thinking about it and to come to this experience.
Yeah, I think it's important. What, for you, Martha, what were some things that you found that were helpful? Because I don't know about for y'all, but when we lost Ryan, there just weren't a lot of resources out there for grieving parents. We didn't know where to look. We didn't know how to even start. I think it's gotten better, but we've still got a long way to go. Were there any things in particular that did help you guys, or that are helping today?
Yeah, well, I think, unfortunately, I think our experience with a lack of resources was very similar. And what we experienced was honestly just a void of what to do, how to do it. Everything from how to tell a 3-year-old that her sister is never coming home again to how to plan a funeral. Who do I call? Where do I go? How do I cancel?
Right.
How do I cancel a social security number? So there's it's both really practical stuff as well as big, deep things that come with this experience. And we had no one to help us walk and navigate that. And so we spent a lot of time just trying to figure it out and trying to piece together what little information was out there. And I think, again, it was a part of our type A control personalities that we'd already talked about.
Yeah.
We knew that there had to be something out there, that the one photocopied brochure that we walked out of the hospital with could not possibly be all of the information there was on how to navigate child loss. And so my husband and I really just dove into trying to figure it out. And then we, kind of step back and we're like, again, we're very educated, very savvy, very type A people. What about all of these people who don't have those resources and don't have the knowledge or skills or even bandwidth to, even if they did have the knowledge and skills, just the bandwidth to do this work. So we, with another bereaved couple, have actually started an organization where we do just that. It's called Just Enduring, and it provide as many resources as we can think of, and it's always growing and always changing on our website. And we really want it to be kind of that one-stop shop of any question you have after you've lost a child. You can at least get the initial piece of information on our website, and then it might take you someplace else. So, if your child died of cancer, here are a lot of general things that we know are somewhat universal to, how the things that are going to happen after you've lost a child. And then here's some resources specifically about support groups for families that have lost a child to cancer and that sort of thing. So we also try and be a connector and help people find families and groups and support in ways that might be most meaningful to them. So that's really one of the biggest ways we've found hope and healing in our grief, is really turning her legacy into helping other people not have to try so hard. Because again, this is the worst thing. I think we could agree that this is the worst thing that could have happened to us. And it doesn't have to be so hard to find help. That's really what we need to do.
Yeah, I love that, Martha, that you guys are actually sort of like a one-stop shop for where to find these resources. That's incredibly unique. And you kind of took the question right out of my mouth and went ahead and addressed that. I think that, would you say that that starting Just Enduring, because that's the name of your organization, Just Enduring, for those who might have missed what Martha said, do you think that was a way that you guys were able to find new meaning and purpose after something so traumatic?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I think we knew very early on that for us, we needed to put our energy into something. And it's become our way to parent her when she's not here. So we, building that organization and supporting other families and helping them through their grief journeys is exactly that. It's how we can turn our grief into hope and can continue to put one foot in front of the other and make sure that her life was not in vain, and that she has a legacy that will carry on when she can't create one for herself.
I love that. You're keeping her memory alive. She's touching lives today that she never could have touched before, because her mom and dad are doing that on her behalf. And I love your story, Martha, because I think it represents a lot of other people who just don't have the opportunity, maybe don't have the people in their life where they can wrestle with these things in an open and honest way in a safe place. And I think it goes back to shows again that, every grief journey is different. There's no right or wrong way to grieve. Certainly there are healthy and unhealthy ways, but it's messy. There's nothing pretty about grieving. And it's not something that we get over. It's something that we learn how to live with for as long as we live the rest of our lives. It's not something that we think about 24/7, but it just is always there. Well, Martha, it has been such a privilege and such a pleasure to have you on our podcast today. I so appreciate you sharing your story. I appreciate your courage, appreciate your transparency. I think your story is going to touch the lives of a lot of people and offer them some hope and encouragement on their journey as well.
Well, thank you for having me, and thank you so much for letting me share a little bit of Everly's story. It's always a joy to be able to share her story and her legacy with others. So thank you for the opportunity.
Absolutely. Absolutely. The privilege is all mine. Every story is important because I believe that every story matters to God. Thank you, Martha. Well, thank you for joining us today. If you would like to offer your thoughts on today's episode, simply click the link under the episode summary. And if you're interested in sharing your story on a future episode, email us using the provided link. Join us again in 2 weeks to hear another story of how God meets us in our pain, creates something beautiful from the broken pieces, and restores meaning, purpose, and hope.